so I ended up making this pretty crazy deck. It is 50 card Prank Kid Thunder. I ended up going completely undefeated with it my last locals, which was last night. Just a quick FYI. Thank you, Team Eagle Factor. I am part of your team, but thank you so much for the great field center. But I wanted to go ahead and show off this crazy deck that I ended up building, and it ended up running a lot more consistently than I had thought. I thought you guys might want to go ahead and see it. So in regards to this deck build, it's the same thing as every Prank Kid deck that I've done before. 3 of each. You should never ever cut that down. It is the best monster lineup. For Thunder Dragons, 1 Roar. This comes in later, but I also run 2 Hawk. When you used to run the Summon Sorceress, you'd run one of this, and if you saw it and had to do it, use it in mid-combo, it was pretty much useless. But I ended up finding this to be really, really impactful in most situations of the game. And then 3 Dark, just because this is exactly what you want to pull off. Even if you don't have a way to get rid of it out of your hand, you get it set up later in the turn if you have this off. If not, you're just gonna activate this, want a Fancy, and make a Colossus, and then hopefully that'll get you where you need to go. Do remember this does end up breaking sometimes because it's Thunder Dragon Prank Kid. It happens. But one of the most important things is you can just end on a Colossus and a set monster and pass, and that normally does end up putting you through enough, and it's really impactful. But why am I running the 1 Roar? It has 2 uses. First off, you can banish the Hawk, right, off of the Roxy's. If you have the Roar also in hand, you can banish the Hawk, and then you can recycle it with the Roar. If you open just the Roar, you can special summon the Dark, link into a generic link 2, which for me is the B-Cop, but normally it should be Masquerena, because Masquerena can get you anywhere in this deck. But it opens up a lot, and then there's also a small situation where you can recycle the Fusion, so that you can activate the Fusion, go into Titan or into Butler, and then when you need to, you activate Fusion, search for the Roar, activate the Roar, recycle the Fusion, and then summon Butler, and then it's a free Regeki. So it's basically a searchable, quote-unquote, Regeki in situations, which it did come up, weirdly enough. And then we've got the 1 Thunder Dragon Fusion. That one's pretty obvious. Gold Sark. This one's really, really big. I didn't think that I'd need this in the main deck, but I wanted to make it an even number. So the Gold Sark I added in, and you can do your normal Prank Kid combo, activate Gold Sark, summon the Dark, or activate the Dark, summon the Hawk, make a Colossus, make a Toad, and then have 2 extra Prank Kid monsters on board after you bow out. So you can go wash your bow out with something else. It's really crazy. This one's Monster Reborn. A lot of people, I didn't really think about putting this in, but in just Prank Kids, this card is amazing. But for the Thunder Prank Kid variant, it's really, really cool. So what you can do is if you open up just Dark and Monster Reborn, you activate Dark, search for another one, reborn the Dark, and then just go into a Colossus and pass. Colossus is crazy impactful in this deck, and it's really good. I won games alone just on the Colossus and a Toad and a Bow Wow set up for a Butler. So I won mostly off of that. The 1 set rotation and the 1 terraforming, just because it's really good. Set rotation, terraforming. I do end up running the 2 targets for the set rotation, even though it's still 50. I just wanted to make sure even if I opened up one of the targets, I'd have another one in deck. and it's Fusion Recycling Plant. Pure Pranked players, if you don't run this card, you really should. This is the best card as a set rotation target. If not, it would be Mystic Mine. But Fusion Recycling Plant, basically it lets you set up for free for most of your combos. And then Mystic Mine, let's see here, 3 place. It's a Rhoda, you should run it at 3. I don't know why people go and run it at 2. 3 pranks. I have the 1 English and 2 German because the person that gave me the core only got 2 German. So hopefully he said that he had the 3rd one, so I'm looking, hopefully he'll come back to me on that. But yeah, I have 3. I have a full German Pranked core now, which is the best. 3 Pandemonium. Like, it's still really impactful. Even if, like, you open up the Pandemonium 2 Prankeds in a dark, like, you use the dark to search for a fusion, and you can technically make a Butler on your first turn, but I like to hold off on that to make sure that my opponent doesn't just, like, straight up play around the Butler. You kind of want to get them at the choke points in this deck, and that's where, like, making the Bow Wow instead of the Butler is more important. But the dark, you can search for a Thunder Dragon fusion so that on your next turn, if you didn't use the Butler, you can make it do another Butler. Or if you did use the Butler, you can just make a Titan and go off from there. 2 Invocation, 3 Polymerization, 1 German because the guy had 1. Hopefully I can find another 2, but for now, it doesn't matter. So yeah, fusion cards are important. Running 8, it seems very bricky, but I have ways around that. 3 Instant Fusion, really good. 3 Desires, really, really good. Basically, Desires ends up fixing the situation where I'm running 50 cards, and the fact that I'm running 3 is really good because I'm running multiples of everything except for pieces that are basically useless, like the Gold Sark, the Thunder Dragon Fusion, the Roar, the Monster Reborn, stuff like that. Like, Pot of Desires becomes a lot less impactful for the deck, other than just getting you 2 free cards. Because this is 50 cards, I wanted to make sure that, like, I still had disruption for my opponent, and normally I would be running Ash Blossoms, but I decided on Called by the Grave instead. Mainly because Called by the Grave lets you go through most of your combos, and then if your opponent is playing cards like Lancia or DD Crow, you can play around that, and they can't go ahead and force you out of playing that card. And then finally, the 2 Obligatory Plan, because Plan is just incredibly good. Other than that, like, with the matchups, alright, and I guess I'll go into the extra deck, which is pretty basic. So, Field Center, tokens, Toad, Dweller, Beat Cop. This would 100% be Masquerena, but for now, it's just Beat Cop. Boral Sword, the Masquerena into that, but if anything, it's just an OTK piece. 2 Doodle, 1 Bow Wow. I needed to cut places for the Colossus engine, and then the 1 Roaster. As much as I didn't go into it, it's still a necessity in the deck. 2 Colossus, 1 Titan, 2 Rocket, 1 Washer, 1 Butler. Other than that, it was a pretty good night. I ended up getting 3rd place. There was 3 undefeated after the final standings, and sadly enough, my matchups were not doing so well that night. So I ended up getting the last out of the first undefeateds. Other than that, you know, I do want to thank you so much for your time today, and I do hope you have a wonderful day. This is Prank Kids Duelist, trying to make rogue decks meta. I ended up facing round 1 against Blackwing, which was the only rogue matchup that I ended up facing. I guess, 2nd rogue matchup, but the third round was a lot less rogue. He was pretty skilled, but the problem is about Blackwings is if you butler them at the right time, they pretty much just pass. And if you do that with a Colossus and a Toad on board, they can't even set up with their Black Whirlwind, so there's no reason for them to start playing. So they can't make most of their combos. So game one, I ended up getting the ability to go first. I made the Toad Colossus Bow Wow and passed. Negated the first activation of his card. Recycled it back onto my side of the field. I think it was some Morgue or something. Activated the Toad to recycle the Dropsies. Activated the Bow Wow to recycle the Fansies and the Lampsies. And normally in standby phase, I normally just shotgun the Bow Wow because you want to actually get rid of it out of your hand or off the board so that they can't just like kaiju you and like lose off of that, but it's perfectly fine. And then game two, he went first, he bricked. I also bricked, so it was kind of a back and forth for a little bit until I had established a Colossus and OTK'd him after that. Which is another thing. Once you establish a Colossus, if you used the Dark to search for itself, you could just tribute over the Colossus for Dark, and then link away with the Dark later, so that I had established a Colossus and OTK'd him after that. Which is another thing. Once you establish a Colossus, if you used the Dark to search for itself, you could just tribute over the Colossus for Dark, and then link away with the Dark later, so that the Dark can search out for a Fusion or a Hawk, so you can make another Colossus later. Round two against Salingrate. That was pretty much a wash. Game one, he ended up going first. He made a pretty established board. I ended up ending on, and I don't know how I broke his board, but it was basically I ended on Colossus a couple times, and he kept trying to, which one is it, Rage or Roar? The one that pops it. He kept trying to pop the Colossus, and I just kept banishing Thunders from the graveyard. So I just kept Colossus on the board, and it was enough to go ahead and stun him until I was able to pull off a Prank Kid combo, which OTK'd him. And the second game was basically the same thing. The problem is with this deck is if they stop you in your plays, you can just make one Colossus, which again, not bad. But you can also just open up one Colossus and that's it. Round three was against Infernoid. Game one, I ended up on the normal Prank Kid board, Dweller, Toad, Bow Wow. I Dwellered so that he wouldn't be able to play anything. I didn't know what he was playing, so I just made that obligatory board. Game, and he ended up playing Infernoid, which was pretty impactful with the Dweller. Doesn't seem like much, but when they resolve Imagination, they do want to go ahead and send from the extra deck, try and pop or something, and he sent Omega in 2 generic cards, and he tried to activate Omega, but he couldn't, and I sent Butler and Roaster, so Butler recycled my Toad for a second time, and then the Roaster recycled the Butler back into the extra deck, so that I wouldn't lose anything, and it basically proved enough to be profitable, because I had 2 free negates, and he couldn't get anywhere. Let's see here. Game 2, he ended on Lair with an established negate. I ended up having a pretty weak hand anyway, with like just one or two cards to pull off my count. It was Instant Fusion and Roxy's with Dead Card in hand with 2 Called by the Graves, and I don't know what the third one was, but it wasn't very good. And he let me start off my play with the Roaster starting to go off, and then halfway through he said, I'll negate that, and I called by the Decatron, and then he tried to negate that, I called by the Decatron again. So both Decathrons got banished, but it still was not enough for me to get forward, because then he just tributed it off with his Jet, because he had the Lair of Darkness on board. Game 3, I guess he didn't open up well, but I ended on Colossus, Toad, Bow Wow, and it was enough to get me there. And then round 4 was against Sky Striker, and game 1, he impermed the Doodle. That was fine. I just recycled it. I just made another one, recycled it with Fansies, made Colossus, Toad, and Bow Wow. And then he impermed the Colossus and then tried to go off. I toaded, and then he normal summoned Ray. I summoned the Bow Wow, or the Butler, activated the Butler, he chained the Ray, I called by the grave the Ray, and he said that was game. Game 2 was basically the same thing. I ended on, he decided to go first, because game 1 he made me go first. So he decided to go first in this one, and I made, I believe, double Colossus, and he passed. No, he had Area 0, and he tried to dig with Area 0. I added only an Area 0, set 2, and passed, because Sky Strikers are so useful now. As a pure deck, as an engine, they're the most broken fucking thing. But then I opened up Twin Twister. I Twin Twistered his 2 back row, which ended up being a Shark Cannon and a Widow Anchor, and then from there I had an established board.